Okay, so last time we took up just the first 3 verses of Jonah, and we unearthed a lot of issues. The first 3 verses really give us, for the introduction to a book, we get way more questions than we get answers. But really kind of the big ones we surfaced. What is God doing in Jonah? Why is God sending an Israelite prophet to a pagan nation that is pretty well known for being pretty bad? That's very strange behavior. We don't see God doing that anywhere else in the Tanakh. Why does Jonah run away from God? Why does he think he can do that? Why is that the action he takes? Why not stay home? Why not say, no, I'm not going to do that? Why just run? Why does God choose this guy who thinks he can run away from God and doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't want to send his message to the Ninevites? Lots of questions that the book is going to kind of maybe answer for us. We'll see. It's going to be a journey. But one thing that we brought up last time that we didn't really get a chance to talk about is Jonah runs, but he doesn't just run anywhere. He runs to Tarshish. What do you know about Tarshish in the Bible? Ends of the earth, yeah. There's debate about, is it Tunisia? Is it Spain? Most people think it's probably somewhere in Spain. So from the perspective of an ancient Near Eastern person, we're talking about the very edge of the known world, right? Especially they don't know they're on a globe or anything. So it's like the ends of the earth, right? So we knew that. Anything else we know about Tarshish? Yep, let's take a look at that. So you can, again, we're going to do a lot of flipping around. It's a lot easier for me to do it on this than it is for you to do it in your analog Bible. So don't feel like you need to flip every time. But if you want to turn to 1 Kings 10, we're going to learn about one of the first times that we see Tarshish come up in the Old Testament. So this chapter of 1 Kings is where we kind of get Solomon's, not really his resume, more his like accolades, right? This is where we learn whether, like, how successful Solomon was. So let's start in verse 14 in chapter 10 of 1 Kings. Now, the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Interesting number. Besides that which came from the explorers and from the business of the merchants and from all the kings of the west and from the governors of the land. King Solomon made 200 large shekels of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Cool. The king also made a great ivory throne and overlaid it with the finest gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the throne had a round top, and on each side of the seat were armrests, comfy, and 2 lions standing beside the armrests. While 12 lions stood there, one on each end of a step, on the 6 steps. The like of it was never made in any kingdom. Cool, Solomon. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. Silver was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon. I love this chapter so much. Doesn't remind me of anyone alive today now. For the king had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Okay. Notice that 4, right? So there's a causal thing here. Why does he have all this stuff? He's got a fleet of ships, boats, the water things, at sea with the fleet of Hiram, who is the king of Tyre, which is a shady alliance that Solomon makes in order to build the temple. Once every 3 years, the fleet of ships of Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, that's fun, and peacocks. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom, and the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them brought his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, myrrh, spices, horses, and mules. Don't know why that's important. So much year by year. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. And the king made silver, which was like nothing at the time, as common in Jerusalem as stone. And he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of the Shephelah. And Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Kiu. And the king's traders received from Kiu at a price. A chariot could be imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. And so through the king's traders, they were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. Sounds pretty good, right? Like silver, we don't even talk about silver in Solomon's kingdom. And all of this apparently has a lot to do with these ships of Tarshish that Solomon has through this alliance to the king of Tyre. Here's the problem. What is Solomon? What's his job? Of king of Israel. I wonder if there's anywhere in Scripture where we get some ground rules for the king of Israel. Let's flip to Deuteronomy 17. Back to Moses. He's going to see this coming. Deuteronomy 17. We're going to be starting in verse 14. So Deuteronomy is this big sermon that Moses gives to the Israelites before they enter the promised land. It's kind of meant to cover a lot of bases, remind them of the law, remind them of their purpose, and also pick up some odds and ends. So here's one. Moses speaking to the people. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me, which is, by the way, not a good thing, being like all the nations around you. So Moses is anticipating kind of a screw up here. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. Okay, so that's allowed. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. There's going to be a big issue with Herod, by the way, in the future, because he's an Edomite. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself. Uh-oh. Or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. Uh-oh. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. Solomon has, 1,400 horses, and he goes down to Egypt to get them. So that's not good. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself. Lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. Oh dear. So this is very deliberate. Looking back at 1 Kings, this passage is very much what sounds to us like, wow, this guy was crushing it. The GDP of Israel was like up here, right? The author of 1 Kings is flagging up to us, this is bad. He is breaking every rule, which is not that many rules, honestly, that God gave Israel for kings. Solomon is just breaking all those rules. And a lot of it comes down to these ships from Tarshish. So the ships from Tarshish are the ones bringing this excess of wealth into Solomon's kingdom that the author of Kings sees as a really big act of disobedience on Solomon's part, which in America we're like, what? But there it is. So we have this picture that the function of Tarshish, it's this way of getting great wealth. And Tim Mackey, I think, puts this really well. Tarshish, the ships of Tarshish, is where you go when you want to build your own Eden. Right? Just huge, massive, resources, wealth, all these things. You can build a kingdom, sprawling, powerful, full of chariots, all these things. And when you build that kingdom, you can kind of follow your own rules, or you can kind of pick and choose what gods you want. We hear a similar thing in 2 Chronicles. Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, is going to try and send a fleet to Tarshish with Ahaziah, who's a wicked king of Israel. And God sends a prophet and is like, nope. And those ships all get destroyed at sea. Psalm 48, we're told that God is against the ships of Tarshish. Even more stark, if you want to turn to Isaiah chapter 2, you know it's bad if you're getting called out in the beginning of Isaiah. So in Isaiah chapter 2, the big theme we have developing in the chapter is this idea of the day of the Lord, right? And starting in verse 12, Isaiah starts to paint a picture of how that day is going to go. So Isaiah chapter 2, verse 12. For the Lord of hosts has a day against all that is proud and lofty, against all that is lifted up, and it shall be brought low, against all the cedars of Lebanon, lofty and lifted up, and against all the oaks of Bashan, against all the lofty mountains, and against all the uplifted hills, against every high tower, and against every fortified wall, against all the ships of Tarshish, and against all the beautiful craft. And the haughtiness of man shall be humbled, and the lofty pride of men shall be brought low, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. So Isaiah pulls on this image to say when people want to exalt themselves, when people want to build their own beautiful kingdoms, they set out ships to Tarshish, and Isaiah is saying the Lord is going to wreck those ships. This kind of way of trying to build your own kingdom, not going to fly. Which makes it surprising then what we read in Isaiah 60. So if you flip ahead, a few dozen chapters, because Isaiah has a lot to say. So in Isaiah 60, we have this idea that the Lord is going to rise up and people are going to see his glory. Verse 3, and nations shall come to your light. The glory of Israel, the light of Israel is going to be restored, and nations are going to flock to Israel. Verse 4, lift up your eyes all around and see. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from afar, and your daughters shall be carried on the hip. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and exult, because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. We start hearing about all these nations that are going to come. And in verse 9, we hear, for the coastlands shall hope for me, the ships of Tarshish first, to bring your children from afar, their silver and gold with them, for the name of the Lord your God and for the Holy One of Israel, because he has made you beautiful. Foreigners shall build up your walls, and their kings shall minister to you. For in my wrath I struck you, but in my favor I have had mercy on you. Your gates shall be open continually. Day and night they shall not be shut, that people may bring to you the wealth of nations, with their kings led in procession. For the nation and kingdom that will not serve you shall perish. These nations shall be utterly laid waste. So we have this image that God is going to do this great restoration. And with that restoration, nations are going to come. And among those nations, apparently the first is going to be Tarshish. So there's going to be this kind of redemption where this place that seems to be this locus of personal kingdom building, these people are going to come all the way from the edge of the known world. They're going to see, like the wise men, they're going to see the light of Israel, and they are going to flock to it to serve the Lord. So isn't it interesting then that in the book of Jonah, Jonah does the exact opposite. He leaves the light of Israel. He disobeys the Lord to go to this place at the edge of the world that, biblically speaking, is pretty much just for building your own paradise. That seems to be Jonah's idea, is for some reason, which again, we don't know yet, Jonah's like, I can't live here anymore. I don't want to live in the Lord's presence. I want to go here. I want to go to Tarshish where I can kind of build up my own kingdom. The Lord is telling him to go to a nation to bring them to repentance, like in Isaiah, and instead he's going to go build his own Eden somewhere else. It's actually interesting. A rabbi named Abraham Ibn Ezra points out that in the Hebrew, when it talks about Jesus fleeing from the presence of the Lord, that word fleeing from is not like the verbiage is not like a frightful flight. It's not like running away from something you're afraid of. It is turning your back on something. And we pointed this out last time. The first place we see it is when Cain leaves the presence of the Lord after murdering his brother. So Jonah is, for reasons we do not know, very deliberately trying to cut off God and go to his own place, build his own paradise somewhere else, because something about what God wants him to do, he does not want to live in that kingdom. He does not want to be part of that mission. And he also goes by way of Joppa, which is interesting because Joppa is how Solomon imported a bunch of stuff into the palace for the building of the temple. And in the one passage in Kings or Chronicles, where we talk about Joppa, it then tells us that Solomon basically enslaves a bunch of the foreigners sojourning in Israel to build the temple, which throughout Exodus and Deuteronomy, God is constantly telling Israel, do not enslave the foreigner among you, for you were once foreigners in a land not your own. Right? So Solomon, even in building the temple, building his own kind of vision of what Israel should look like, is turning his back on the foreigner, the resident alien, the immigrant, which I don't know if that could possibly be relevant to us today, but maybe worth thinking about. So we left verse 3. Jonah is turning his back on the Lord. And the question we have now is, what is God going to do about it? Right? Because he could do, what could God do about it? Yeah, just kill Jonah straight up, hit him with one of those withering diseases that kings keep getting hit with in the Bible. What else could he do? Yeah, just be like, okay, someone else, I guess, whatever. He's going to run away. Fine. He'll just be a byword in the Bible and we'll let him do his thing and we'll just find someone else. Could do that as well. So the big question for us then moving into these next set of verses is, what is God going to do? And what do we think God is up to? So let's flip to Jonah. We're gonna be bold and do another 3 verses today. And we're going to do the exact same thing we did last time. So we're going to read through Jonah 1, 4 through 6. And we're just going to ask ourselves, what's weird? What is odd here? What is weirdly specific? What is weirdly vague? What is confusing? What doesn't make sense? What bears further questioning? What is offensive or problematic? Or maybe I don't think that should be in the Bible or something like that. So we're going to do that because this man, boy, every part of this story is so bizarre. So he has paid his fare. He's going to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord, away from the face of the Lord. Then verse 4. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, "What do you mean, you sleeper?" My wife has said that to me before. "Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish." Okay, so let's talk about what's weird. Also, I forgot to do this last time. This is, if you would like recordings of this class, if you miss, or if you just want to go back over it because my voice puts you to sleep and you want to utilize that or something, then this is you can just put your email on this. You don't need to put your name or anything. And that will get you on this list. I already sent out an email of last week's recording to people who were on a previous list. So if you got an email last week, you don't need to put your email on here again. You're fine. But if you didn't get an email last week and you would like to get recordings, you can put your name on here. So we'll just pass that around. Okay, so what is weird about that section of the story? Or any lingering weirdness from the first 3 verses? I'll allow it. That's fine. Jonah slept during a storm. Yep. Sleepy Joe. What's he doing? I think the big question is like how, right? We don't know how big this boat is. I mean, it's apparently like a significant vessel, but I don't know if you've been on a boat. I've not been on a boat during like a storm, especially not of this magnitude, but I don't know, maybe it's like a cradle thing, maybe, but you wouldn't imagine it would be an easy snooze, you know? Well, it tells us he goes to the far recesses of the ship. So he seems to, it's kind of hard to, it's a very weird phrase, which we'll talk about. He might be going to like a far corner. He's definitely going as far down into the ship as he can go. So maybe he's not, I don't know if you would feel it less there. I don't know. I'm not a boat. I like land. I'm more Jewish in that way, I suppose. Men are sound sleepers. That's true. That's true. So this might just be a commentary on the patriarchy. We don't know. So yeah, other things that are strange in this section or weird. Yeah, so it's interesting. The captain notices and addresses Jonah's absence. I think it's maybe Philip Carey who points out like maybe the captain is the most righteous person in the whole story. He does the least problematic stuff in the story. He sees a problem. He's trying to address the problem. He's getting everyone involved. He is kind of mean to Jonah, but Jonah kind of deserves it at this point. So yeah, the captain being kind of the vessel of getting Jonah to like wake up instead of, the category whatever hurricane we're dealing with is interesting. What else? Yeah. This raises a question for me. How bad is this storm? Because if you think like these are sailors, they're sailing the Mediterranean, not a small sea, pretty big, and you do hit storms on the sea. So you have a bunch of what we would presume to be experienced sailors. The word there is mariners, which that Hebrew word Ezekiel uses in another passage. And Ezekiel just talks about how skilled sailors are, how good they are at their job. So, we're not given any indication these are like green intern sailors, right? So how do these guys know to immediately abandon all normal ways of dealing with a storm and just start chucking and praying? Like, what's going on there? What else?
All the sailors are praying to their gods, and the captain wakes up Jonah and tells him, "Pray to your God too."
Yeah. So what do you find weird about that? Yes. So we have an interesting contrast where we have the pagans all being very religious. Philip Carey, again, really phenomenal commentary on Jonah, by the way. Very well written if you want to just deep dive Jonah. Great book. Philip Carey points out, we talk sometimes in Christianity about how like Christianity is the only religion that believes in like grace. And that's not really true. The sailors don't, as far as we know, these sailors are just like, help us, I don't know. Like they don't seem to be bargaining for anything. They're just asking for help. And that's it. And the captain seems to be asking Jonah to do the same. And it's a pretty stark contrast that all of these pagans are just crying out to like any god to please give them some kind of help, please. And the one person who knows the correct God to call out to is doing the exact opposite of praying. Oh, I wonder if there's anywhere else in the Bible where someone's praying and someone else is sleeping. That's weird. I don't know. Weird. Anything else?
This isn't so much something that's weird, but we do know a story of someone else who slept on a boat during the storm.
Ooh, yeah.
Are there any parallels?
Ding, 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 Jesus. Yep. Jesus stuff? Question mark? Yeah, there's Matthew, Mark, and Luke all just like ring this bell super hard. So we'll maybe talk about that today. We'll definitely talk about it because when you think about what's happening on this boat and who is playing what role, and then you take that cast of characters and ask who is playing what role in the Jesus story. Very interesting stuff going on. Anything else?
Well, I like that they bring up that that God says, "I did this."
Yeah.
The Lord will do.
Mm-hmm.
Stirs up the tempest. It leaves no question about that. He's going to get them.
Yes. So there's a Jewish professor named Uriel Simon, also has a phenomenal commentary on Jonah, that points out that in the Hebrew, there's a specific way to construct a sentence where you put kind of extra emphasis on the subject. So we see it in Genesis now, like now the serpent was more crafty than any other creature. There's a lot of emphasis on that subject. And it's the same thing here. The author gives us no ambiguity. God is 100% doing this. This is not, because you can imagine a form of this story where Jonah just goes out and he gets into a storm. And we're like, oh, what does that mean? And that could be interesting and we could get all kinds of stuff from that. But the author of Jonah has a very different agenda. He's like, this is God doing it. No question. This is 100% God's doing, which again raises the question, so what is he doing? Right? Because this looks maybe a few different ways. Probably the most intuitive way this looks is God is trying to kill Jonah. God's trying to punish Jonah, right? For doing a very heinous thing, thinking he can just run away from God. So is God doing that? Is God not doing that? We have to read on to find out. Mm-hmm. That is weird. Yep. Yeah, this is a weird thing about this book in general because it's a prophet book. And prophet books are almost exclusively just prophets talking most of the time. Occasionally we have a few narratives like in Jeremiah and other places. But the fact that actually we get a little more prophecy from the captain initially than anything we hear from Jonah. Jonah is going to get his piece in chapter 2. That's kind of his Hamlet soliloquy. And then he's going to get his big fiery Oscar scene in chapter 4. But he is almost completely silent in chapters 1 and 3 for the most part, which is, and when he does talk, it's weird. So yeah, it's the relative silence for this whole section. The fact that Jonah has not said anything about what he's doing, why he's doing it, He's not praying during a time of distress, all this stuff. Very weird behavior. Definitely meant to make us go, what? What's going on? Like, is Jonah going to suddenly hit us with a big insight, like all of a sudden, or what? But yeah, the silence of Jonah. Because notice too, this is looking ahead a little bit. The captain says, hey, get up, pray to your God. Does Jonah do that? No, not at all. Which had to be awkward, right? Everyone is doing it. The rabbis, kind of to illustrate this point, they postulate that the sailors from all 70 nations, the 70 nations we have outlined in Genesis, are on this boat. So we're calling to like every possible god. And the one guy who knows Yahweh is just, when he's like literally told, like he gets called at the back of the class, it's like, hey, go pray. Doesn't do it. Doesn't do it at all. We go from here to casting lots to figure out whose fault this is. And we're not told what that interaction was like, or how he kind of sidesteps that, but it's a deafening silence from Jonah throughout.
It's almost as if his silence is a part of escaping the presence of God. But I'll talk here.
Yeah, silent treatment. There's a lot of avoidance in this with Jonah. And how deep and how far that avoidance goes is something we'll be exploring here. Anything else?
I think it's interesting that in order to get to Paradise, he has to cross essentially death because of what the sea,
Yeah.
what water in the Bible, and so he's essentially putting himself at risk, and also like, there's this idea that I think among the ancient or Hebrew worldview that like the sea was uncontrolled.
Yeah.
And like that's where you go to avoid God is. Surely God can't control something that is too hazardous as a storm at sea. And so when he goes there, I think maybe we're supposed to think that he's stick.
Yeah.
Like right off the bat it says not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you're already hearing the narrative of God controls the sea.
Yeah.
He controls that which cannot.
Yeah, God's sovereignty over everything, which is something Jonah is going to attest to, which, the cognitive dissonance is wild. But yeah, like one of the messages here, there's a rabbinic idea. One of the kind of theories that the rabbis put out there, I think it's Rabbi Eliezer first postulates this, that maybe what Jonah is trying to do, because again, yeah, why go to Tarshish? Why not just go to like Antioch or something? Just go, or Egypt, just go somewhere far away. Why get on a huge boat journey? That the idea is maybe like, well, God's domain is where there's like life and order. So if I go to the place that is death and destruction, because kind of the only real times we see Jewish people interacting with the sea is the flood, which, the water is playing the role of death and destruction in the flood. And when the Jewish people are walking through the sea, they're like not touching the sea. They're just like cheat coding their way through. And then the sea kills and destroys the Egyptian army, right? So Jonah maybe has this idea of, God can't get me out here. The analogy that's given is a servant of a high priest who escapes to a cemetery to get away from the high priest because the high priest can't go where dead things are. To which the high priest says, but I have servants who can go there. And that God kind of does the same thing. It's like, if you think you can escape from me there, I got all kinds of agents out here. I got winds, I got fish, I got everything. So yeah, we're definitely supposed to be perplexed about the fact that he's on the sea, and we're only going to get more perplexed as we go on. So let's talk a little bit. So yeah, like the Lord hurls a wind. That word, God's going to do a lot of things and in this book. And usually when he does things, he appoints things. So he appoints a fish, he appoints a worm, he appoints a plant. But in this case, he does not appoint the wind, he hurls it. That's the same verb for when Saul tries to pin David to the wall with a spear, right? So the idea is like you're strike to kill, essentially, seems to be the idea. Can we think of any other times that God hits people with a big storm? Sodom, yeah, I mean that's like a firestorm. It's like a weird fiery rain that happens. Other times, people being wicked and God's like, storm. Flood, yeah. Isn't it interesting? Back when God says to Jonah, I need you to go to Nineveh because their evil has come up before me, there's definite callbacks to Genesis there in the language where God sees the wickedness of the people and that their thoughts were only wickedness all the time. We were definitely supposed to get some Noah callbacks there. And then isn't it interesting that God is saying, hey, there's a bunch of wicked people. I want you to go deal with it. And what does Jonah do? He gets on a boat. So, in the Noah story, are we going to do a T chart? We're going to do a T chart. And their names are so close to each other too. Isn't that interesting? And oh man, are there any doves in the note? Man, stuff happening. So we've got wickedness. So we have the wickedness of the earth. And then we have the wickedness, or the Ra, is the Hebrew word, says, of Nineveh. And God comes to this character to do something about it, right? God goes to Noah, God goes to Jonah. And so Jonah faithfully gets on a boat, right? The boat is like a whole act of faith and obedience on Noah's part. It's going to be his salvation out of this storm. Jonah rebelliously gets on a boat. Right? He adopts this kind of anti-Noah stance. God wants to do something about the wickedness. And notice, like here, God's like, I'm just gonna kill everybody. Whereas here, God's like, I might kill everybody, but you should go talk to them about it first. We're in a post-rainbow world here, where God's like, we don't just kill it, we don't just destroy the world, right? We're gonna see if we can work with people. And while Noah responds with faithful boating, Jonah responds with running away and getting on a boat. And then we have a massive storm. But during Noah's storm, there's never any implication that they're in much danger. The boat seems solid. The boat never really seems to be under threat that we're told. Whereas here, in this storm, we're told that the ship threatened to break up. The ark that Jonah is trying to get on is not a reliable vehicle to save him from the wrath of God here. So we have this kind of anti-Noah thing going on. Isn't it also interesting that Noah is just surrounded by his family, like the chosen people, so to speak, and Jonah is surrounded by pagans, right? The kind of people that would have been swept away by the flood. That's who Jonah is surrounded by on this boat. Very weird situation going on here. So in this, we definitely are meant to see some flood imagery here. And the flood is like the decreation of the world, right? Genesis is all about God separating out waters. And in the flood, all the waters get unseparated. They all come together. And when that happens, people get destroyed. Nations, peoples get destroyed. And so we see a similar thing here. The threat that we have here is like total and utter destruction. That's what God has sent to Jonah. Which, again, kind of feels like, so God's just trying to kill Jonah then. This is just full-on wrath, punishment, Sodom and Gomorrah stuff. Although there is a hint in the text that maybe that's not what's going on, but we're going to talk about that weeks from now after we've covered the whole book. And that's one of my favorite things about it, but we're going to hold off. So then, this is all happening. The sailors are freaking out. We don't know why. We don't know how they just know that this is like not a feasible situation. The rabbis have a fun speculation that the storm was just impacting their boat and they were seeing other boats sail by in just calm waters, that they were like, that they immediately were like, oh, this is supernatural. Text doesn't tell us that, but apparently there's something about this situation that these sailors go from doing their job to just crying out to whatever God they can think of. And Jonah is the only person that is not doing that. Why? Why isn't Jonah calling out to God to save them from the storm? Yeah, so maybe this is still just silent treatment, right? Like, God, you and I are not speaking right now, which does kind of cast the whole thing a little differently, right? This feels very personal between Jonah and God. This doesn't just seem like, I don't want to do this, because of what it might mean. It seems like God has some real conflict, or Jonah has some real conflict with God that he's going through here. So maybe it's that. Why else might he not be praying? Yeah.
He's heard God speak to him, and he and we'll find out later. He knows that God's going to do what has set out to eat.
Yeah.
And so, it's avoided and God talked to God, and maybe something will happen.
Yeah.
I think we probably all relate that to some degree.
Yeah.
Sin, not because not always, because we know we're sinning, but sometimes we can ignore the conviction.
Yeah. Yeah. That Jonah knows there is a thing God wants to do, and God is going to get what God wants. And the only thing I have control over, maybe, is how much I cooperate or participate in it. Right?
Elijah, where
Yes.
actively trying to listen to God in a storm.
Yes.
Jonah is very not trying to.
Oh, yeah. Jonah and Elijah are like, it's red lights going off everywhere. We'll probably have a whole class just to focus on that theme. But Jonah is constantly bringing up images of Elijah. So much so that some rabbis, for various reasons that we're not going to get into, think that maybe Jonah was the child that Elijah resurrected. That's a whole thing. We're not going to get into that. That's all rabbinic. That's not, in the Bible, so you don't have to believe that. But there's a lot of connections. That thing in verse 1 where God says, arise and go to Nineveh. And then in verse 2, it's like, hey, he arose and then he ran away. We get that same construction in Elijah when God tells Elijah, arise and go to the widow of Zarephath. So go to like a person who's not from around here. And Elijah arises, but he does it. Jonah is going to there's a lot of suicidal ideation with Jonah, and we see very similar things with Elijah. Elijah is one of the only people in the Bible, besides like Job and Jonah, who's like, maybe I should just die. Can you just kill me, please? There's almost this kind of like throwing off of the prophetic mantle, where Elijah has this profound disappointment after Mount Carmel, which we'll talk about. And it's so bad he wants to die. And Jonah is going to have a very similar thing when he experiences a profound disappointment in chapter 4. I think it's Uriel Simon who points out that Elijah has a situation where something goes wrong and he intercedes and calls out to God. It's when that boy dies, the boy that's born to the widow of Zarephath. He like goes to God and is like, hey, can you undo this, please? And he resurrects a child. And Jonah does the opposite. He has a chance where he knows he could intercede on behalf of these sailors by praying, and he does not do that. He does not call out to God. And yeah, the sleeping, trying to hear what God's doing, but also like sleep is a part of it in the midst of a storm. Elijah is a fascinating character in the Bible. I think he's like number one good boy, and he's actually much more complicated than that. And Jonah is just like with Noah. He's painted in a way where we're definitely supposed to hold him and Elijah up to each other and see how they compare. So we'll dig into that more because you're definitely hitting on something there.
Piano reminds me very much of a rebellious child.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like dad tells him, "Hey, you need to do this," and the kid's like, "No."
Yeah.
He runs away. And maybe the parents like, "Okay," and the parents a lot of times they will put obstacles in the child's way if they have to.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Jonah, it's like he knows dad can fix this, but it's like there's no way he's going to turn and ask dad for help.
Yeah. It's definitely the picture we're getting of Jonah here. The kind of standard reading of Jonah is he's a big, dumb, bad person, which I think is a very legitimate reading of the text. I do think there's another reading that is also compelling, and I think the author leaves us open to both. I think maybe there's something going on in Jonah's psyche that we're going to get to as we explore this character. But crucially, Jonah, this is all happening. So these sailors are all crying out to God. They all think they're going to die, and they're just like, they're throwing out cargo, which is like the whole reason they're probably on this voyage. So they've completely abandoned their mission of why they're here. And they're crying out to any God they can think of. And Jonah, Hebrew has a weird thing where you can use a verb to signal that something is happening at the same time. So Jonah, while this is happening, so it seems like this is happening simultaneously. They're doing this, and Jonah just goes and takes a nap. He goes to the inner part of the ship, which is a weird way to talk about a ship in Hebrew and in English. One scholar from the University of Indiana points out that there's probably a word play going on here. There's a Hebrew phrase, which I'm going to botch. So the Hebrew here is Yarkate Hasafina, the inner recesses of the ship, the bowels of the ship, however you want to put that, which seems to be a word play on a much more common phrase in the Bible, Yarkate Zaphon. And the Yarkate Zaphon is a reference to the far reaches of the north, which is in reference to the mountains where God and humanity can meet. So the far mountains of the north are meant to be like this place where God and humanity can come together, like Mount Zion, right? So isn't it interesting that Jonah, in the midst of this crisis, is going kind of to the opposite place? He's getting closer to the death waters, farther away from God in a vertical sense. He seems to be receding even deeper into this kind of isolation, which is really interesting. So why does Jonah go to sleep? Maybe he's just being rebellious. One rabbi, Malbim, suggests that Jonah knows that this storm is here for him. He goes into the bottom of the ship because his theory is that if the ship breaks, he'll be the first one to die. And so then maybe the other sailors will be saved. Possibly. So maybe he's just like, this is just, I caused this, so this is the best I could do to salvage it, which might sound weird to us, but it does kind of track with him being like, just throw me into the sea. Jonah doesn't seem totally selfish, at least in this. He's like willing to die, at least, maybe in order to save the sailors. Or maybe he's just still running. When you can't deal with people, you can go to sleep and just kind of shut everything off, shut everything out. So maybe he's trying to be weirdly noble in an odd circumstance. Maybe he's just running even farther away from God. Maybe he's just convinced God's not going to listen to him. He's like, I already blew it, so there's no point in me praying. That's just going to make things worse. We don't know. And the author of Jonah definitely wants us to be rolling these questions around. He's not answering them for us right now. He wants us to consider that kind of spectrum of possibilities. So then we have this interaction between the captain and Jonah. This phrase, arise you sleeper, is very much the captain is basically being like, what are you doing? You idiot, what are you doing? Every time we see this phrase come up in scripture, it is someone getting absolutely roasted by God or someone else. So this captain is basically like, you moron, do you not see what's happening right now? And he tells him to arise and cry out to your God. Which, if we look back at verse 1, sounds a lot like what God tells Jonah to do to Nineveh. So this pagan sea captain is echoing God's words like a prophet back to a Jewish prophet, basically being like, hey, this isn't going to work. Get up and cry out like you were supposed to do in the first place. This is the second time Jonah is told to do this, and he's not going to do it. He does get up, so he does that at least. But he got up the last time and ran the wrong way. So the third time, he's going to get it. But this second time, he's still going to be resistant to the call. So then with our last 5 minutes here, let's talk a little bit about the Jesus connection here, because there's a very famous story in all the synoptic gospels where the disciples are crossing over the Sea of Galilee. And there's a big old storm. The disciples freak out because the disciples are probably not really seafaring guys. They're fishermen, so they probably hang out in the shallows most of the time. So when Jesus is like, cross that sea, they're probably like, okay, I don't want to do that, but all right. This storm comes up and Jesus is just asleep in the boat, right? Depending on which story you're reading, what the disciples say to him when they wake him up is interesting. I think it's Luke and Matthew have the disciples basically say like, wake up, we're perishing. We're going to die. That's essentially what they say. Mark throws in an interesting detail. He says, do you not care that we're going to die? Do you not care that we are perishing? And then Jesus gets up, he calms the storm, and he says, oh, you have little faith, or where is your faith? Which I always have felt like is a little harsh. I don't know, just personally. Because they did the right thing, right? Like they're like, the storm is happening, let's talk to Jesus about it. You know, they do that. What were they supposed to do? I don't know. I'm still wrestling with that one personally. But isn't it interesting? In the Jonah story, this is a game that you can play in the Bible that yields a lot of really interesting results. Rabbi David Foreman calls this cast of characters. When you see parallels between two stories, one of the things you can do is ask, who's playing what part, right? So in the Jonah story, the captain, the pagan captain, crucially, could turn that into a big lowercase a. The pagan captain wakes up Jonah, and what he talks about sounds very similar, right? He's like, we're perishing, we're going to perish. Wake up, help us, right? Very similar to what the disciples say. And then Jesus is the one who's asleep. Sleepy Jesus. Or not Jesus, sorry, Jonah is asleep. And what is Jonah? He's a rebellious prophet, right? He seems to be like dead to the world. He seems to be kind of sleepwalking through his life right now. So now it's interesting. Who's playing this role in this story? Disciples, right? Jewish disciples. And Jesus is playing this role. That's interesting for a few reasons. One, because the pagan captain is just grasping at straws, right? He has no idea if Jonah is going to be able to do anything that's helpful. He doesn't know that Jonah's God is like the best God or whatever. He just more bodies, you know, let's get more people trying to help. But these disciples at least have some idea that this Jesus person is different. That he, you know, is able to do something. about this. They do say as much. I think it's in Luke, it's either in Luke or Matthew where they say, "Save us," right? And Jesus, far from being a rebellious prophet who seems to kind of be like avoiding God, Jesus is God. Right? We get this sense like Jonah is sleeping is kind of this act of denial and rebellion and just kind of shutting everything off. Maybe he's in despair. Jesus seems to be sleeping as far as we can tell. I think he's trying to prove a point, so maybe he's being a little cheeky here. But also, like, he just seems at peace. Like, this is not threatening to him. Right? And these disciples, by being kind of paired with this pagan captain here, we're given kind of this sense of like, they don't fully understand the situation they're in. They don't fully understand who this person is, just like the pagan captain doesn't really understand. Maybe they should, because they're his disciples. But they don't. There seems to be some sense in which, because they're shocked after Jesus does this, right? They're like, who is this person that can calm the winds and the waves and all these things? And then Jonah, how does Jonah stop the storm? Yeah, Jonah dies, basically. That's the solution. And what does Jesus do? Jesus speaks. In some sense, he calls out to God, right? He does what Jonah should have done in his circumstance. He speaks out to save the people who are in his boat. Excuse me. But also there's this, isn't it interesting that the solution to delivering people from death in this story is that Jonah dies, essentially, right? And in the Jesus story, we don't get that. Jesus doesn't die in this story. But at some point, Jesus is going to deliver a lot of people from death by doing something very similar to what Jonah does on this boat, but in a very different, with a very different heart posture than Jonah.
Sorry.